Okay, hello everyone. This is the last talk before the lunch, so I will do my best to stay in time, in perfect time. But if you will have any question, we can discuss it during the lunch, stop me. Before we start, let me ask three first questions. So, the first one, who codes in React? Don't lie. Okay, keep your hand raised for a few seconds. And keep your hand raised if you code in Next.js, Remix, Redwood, Booker, or another full stack framework. Okay, please keep your hand raised. Last question. How many of you code in Node.js, backend servers, something like more complicated than few APIs? Okay, few one. Okay, enough. I'm Matteo. I'm a software engineer focused on developing digital products. I do this at work as CEO and CTO of Impronta Advance. And in my spare time, I'm co-founder and organizer of Roma.js, which is the community-driven meetup in Rome since 2013. And I'm here today because I've been a fan of React since the first public beta. And I saw and tested on my skin the evolution of the library along these years, from the mixing to the last feature released yesterday, and I mean yesterday for real. And the question I had, and I have, is where are we going with this library? And as always seen in the last couple of years, more or less, we are moving into a new future of web applications. Do you know probably what I'm talking about? It's like we are leaving the browser's kingdom to start coding on backend and our server. And we all know that evolution of technologies starts slowly and then accelerate rapidly. And for example, in December 1903, we took our first flight, detaching from the Earth, and in 121 years, we arrived here. And I feel the same is happening to React. And our journey started in May in 2013, when the React was released. And after 3 years, he reached 50,000 stars on GitHub, which was an amazing result for a library on the ecosystem. And they made the celebrative shirt, this one. And then the next milestone probably is February 2019 with the React tools that renovate the way we write components. And in December 2020, the core teams of React announced that they were and are working on a new concept that are React Server Components. I think everyone here know about React Server Components. And in March, React 18, with other features, released the render to stream, an amazing feature that we're talking about in a few minutes. And last year, October, Next 14 released the UpRouter and declared that the default way to make a web application is starting with React Server Components that are in React 19, which is not released yet. So in the last 2 years, the library and our way to make web application got a new direction. And this starts from the communication between client and server. And if we started with PHP, probably a lot of us started with PHP, with application rendered in the server and small files in JavaScript to do some fancy animation, then we invented a single-page application. So we all know the old-fashioned single-page application where we have a single component that is the root of our application, and we create a root element, where our application is rendered in, and our HTML is pretty empty, just the placeholder. And let's first demo to break the ice. Loading, and my problem. So the data fetching is made by the client who call the server and get back the data. Then we discovered the server-side rendering, which was one of the features in React since the first releases. So we have still our component, which can take the product also from props and render the title. But we can also prepare our server to fetch data server-side, prepare our component, render it to a string, and ship it to the client. And then there is the iteration. Probably we all know what iteration is, and all the other client stuff are attached after the HTML is sent to the browser. And this is the output of our server. So it's probably HTML and with some JavaScript for the client. And this is SEO-friendly, performance-oriented, and it should work, I hope. Okay, probably I should put the button in the other way. So the HTML is sent from the server already compiled, and then all the stuff occurred in the client, like a set interval. So I think it's everything common for all of you. But then we had the streaming response. In React 18, render to pipeable stream has been released, and this feature allows us to ship our application with some placeholder around the suspend boundaries, and wait for the related products solved in the backend, and stream the response to the client. So if we can analyze the request, we got a small chunk of HTML already rendered on the browser. And in the same request, when the component solved in the server, the new chunk of HTML is streamed to the browser with a small, you should see here, small JavaScript to replace the placeholder. And this is with the only JavaScript we need to use streamed component. I don't know how many of you are implemented the render to streamable stream by yourself, but it's useful to understand how our frameworks are working on. And on my GitHub, with the slides, you will find every implementation with example. And after the HTML arrives to the browser, we can start again with iteration and something like this. So I got my shell, and then I got the related products. So I can start deciding what give to the user with priority and less priority. Okay, and then we have React Server Components. I think all of this, today we talk about React Server Components enough, but it's strange that only 1 year ago they has been released, and they are just a sync function that render on the server, and this approach is similar to render to pipeable stream. It's another library. You will find the code. But instead of the HTML, React Render Components returns React Server Payload, which is a serialized version of HTML used by the client. On our client, every time we need to render the React Server component, we need to ask to the server, wait for the render, and then render the response inside the return function of our component. So this is easy because it's here the button. So every time I refresh my page, I got always the same behavior. So the shell and then the related product. But this time, every component is rendered only on the server. And how this works when we have multiple pages, because it's very similar to render a server-side rendering this way. When we need the client router, we have a very simple application with 2 pages, and we need the router that asks to the server every single component that must be rendered in the server. So this is a very simple implementation, and it uses a use state internally, and every time the location change, he asks to the server that create from fetch, wait for the response, and then with the use, it's rendered inside the component. So, and this is very fast. So we have, again, the same shell. The components are loaded every time I click on the page. The page one has a timeout, but is slower than page two. But like for the user experience, we have the two different pages rendered on server. And then we have still the client-side application, like always with the classic use state. So every time I click on the server, on the page, I run another one request to the server, and the server components are calculated in that moment. So we can, of course, update our router. This is, of course, and please do not use in production this kind of router. But for example, we cache the request because we use the use hook, so the promise must be the same in different renders. And then I delete the cache every time I ask a new request. But if I keep the cache inside the client, every time we move again between pages, if I have the stored cache, I can render directly the page. So we saw that the state of rendering, of React rendering paradigms, and like small bricks, we can compound them to reach a new way to develop application and create and decide every single slice of our application how it must be rendered. So if before we had to decide what kind of render strategy we would like to implement as templating for our application or website, now with React we can use the same technology for a multi-paradigm render strategy. Very simple example. We started with a binary decision. I can do my website statically generated. So I call out the API from the browser only for fetch the dynamic data like the user logged and the cart. And this makes the search engines happy because the HTML is served statically. The user happy because it saw the page immediately. And it's good for data which is not stale for a long time. Otherwise, I must revalidate and rebuild every time. You know, probably a lot of blogs are built in this way. Otherwise, I can make it dynamic. I know the user's session handling the request, so I can prepare their own response and ship it to the browser. And then the iteration will finish for the work on the browser. Okay. Now, we can compound the multiple paradigms in the same code base, and I can decide what kind of rendering I want for each part of my application or of my page. So I can generate a static shell, as we saw with the pipe stream, and I can stream dynamic content but relevant from the server, which are the most important data we want to ship to the user. And finally, I can fetch additional and less relevant data from the client. And all of this, I can do it nearly component by component. And this is the direction we are getting with the React library and the React ecosystem. So if you want to start making these choices, we already saw all the native API. You can build your own server and create your application framework. But if you want to use it in production, and I don't know if it is a suggestion or not, but if you want to try it, you can use, for example, a partial pre-rendering in Next.js. It is a feature from Next.js 14 and later. You can enable it in the next config. And then on your component, on your page, you can set it as experimental PPR. This is what it means, that the compiler will produce a pre-rendered as a static HTML with dynamic server content streamed, which is the summarize of what we saw compounding the three ways of rendering we already saw. So this is the demo you can find on the Next.js GitHub. So it compounded everything in one single page. So we have the skeleton, the shell of the application rendered immediately, which is statically deployed and cached. It's just like HTML, with the placeholders that are fulfilled by streamed components, and then other on the client using a client request like always. So multiple layer of rendering means multiple ways to cache data. We can cache pages statically rendered. We can cache components. We can cache fetch and queries and so on, or using memorization for computed components. And everything can boost our application in very granular cache. And for example, we can implement in vanilla, for example, a simple promise that is cleaned every 5 seconds. So every time my component is called, this is the entire component, every time a component is called on the server, it creates a new promise with the due date string. And once the promise is resolved, it will stay resolved inside that variable for other requests until the cache is cleared. So this is a very stupid implementation of the cache, but it works. So there is unable to not store, because in Next 14 everything is statically generated until unless you use this function or other not cache functions. But by the way, this is the same very example. So loading 2 seconds, and every time I click on the refresh, if I take the 5 seconds, which was very fast to don't annoying you, it regenerates on the server, but if it's cached, it responds, I must be verified, with the same seconds of before. So I implemented the cache that lasts 5 seconds, and every time it's expired, it generates another one. We can easily implement a stale-while revalidating approach when we ask for the cache, for the result. If it is expired, I serve the previous value and generate the new one. So probably if you use Next.js, you know what I mean. But if you want something more stable, even if it's unstable in the name, you can use a cache function from NextCache. So it creates a memorized function, and with invalidation tags and expiration time. So you can control every different type of caching inside your application and boost the performance to the edge. And bonus track because I added this slide tonight, to keep an eye on the future. Yesterday night at Next.js Conf 24, they announced the new directive use cache, which is specific for Next.js, of course. And this will be allowed in pages, components, functions, everywhere. And they use the compiler to understand the directive and cache or memorize the function. The function can be calculation or React component as well. So the same behavior, but in a different way. And probably the unstable no cache will disappear in a few months, years, no, I don't know. So, for example, this is the chart of all cache layers that a full stack framework like Next.js implements in your application. And if you want to implement in your own framework, you can give a check on this. And it is like client, server, data caching, function, a lot of different layers that you can use. And with all the basics we saw, you can implement your own engineering model of cache and for your needs. Let's talk about use server and use client. With the introduction of React Server components, we saw how every component is server component by default, and so we must specify use client to get back on the client components. But what about use server? Use server is a directive, can be used in a sync function to mark as callable by client, and we call them server actions. So This means that this function will run inside the server. And technically speaking, they are converted into API and called when with fetch on events on the browser. In this case, we have a server components with the server function and really few bytes in the client just to call an API and get back the answer. So everything I wrote here is not shipped to the browser. I'm still don't know if I'm still a front-end developer or not. By the way, the server action are not only for server components, but using the use client, we can call any server action from the client components is still another API invocation on the client. And if you're curious, in the virtual DOM, they are rendered as React server reference. And the ID is the API, the name of the function that must be called. But calling API means, over the network, means you must face latency, loading state, another UX problem you all know. So to help us with this, in React 19, they introduced the use action state, a new hook that accepts an action, which is just an async function that returns a value, and an initial value. It's like a, I don't know, it's like a use state, but calling an API. And calling the action, when the promise has been fulfilled, the value will be updated with the return of the API. So in very few lines of code, we have, it's like a data fetching, but for mutations. And of course, it's still in beta, experimental, and nobody know when they will ship to us. So using a full stack framework allow us to shift code from front-end to back-end as much as we need. However, full stack frameworks also introduce full stack challenges or full stack problems. Let's give an example. Let's see this function. I suppose everyone here has an utils API file with a lot of functions like this inside. So a list of API calls, sorry. Now let me ask a quick question. This function will be invoked on client or on server? How many of you vote for client? How many of you vote for server? Should be called on server. Yes, yeah, I use this function on the server component. So the external service will be called from my server to the external service, and I use it to make it very fast. And with zero bundle on the client side, it's like a classic server-side rendering, and just to try this new approach. And next Monday, he's starting to work with us. He's a junior front-end developer. On his resume, there were 5 stars on React and GitHub, and he also already worked on React applications. So it's not his first job. And his first task will be create a small previews of films in the reserved area of our product. So he prepared his component, he looked inside the code base, he found the API, and he knows how to call an API in the client components. So yeah, not this way. And when he saved the file, he got this error. That's probably some of you already know. And so he asked to ChatGPT because reading the stack trace is a super senior skill. And he understood that he must put the use client on top of the file to use a use effect. Okay, easy peasy. He saved, and what happened now? Nothing. Everything is working, and the film previews are rendered. Everything is fine, and the feature has been completed without issue, right? So except the fact that that function was designed to be called from the server and has been exposed on the client together with our secrets. Yes, okay. I know there are so many ways to avoid it, protected environment variables that are available on your client or on your server, packages that stop builds if this file will go to the server, to the client, sorry, and also explicit constant like Facebook's teams do in his in their code base. It's very long, so yeah, it's take time. But the point is, we must keep in mind that if a single function in our code base is designed to be called in client or in server, or both, because there are server-side rendering and hydration we can do in the same way. So it's not difficult, of course, but it's one more cognitive effort we must face while debugging CSS gradients in the meantime. So the point is, if you think that this kind of leak is a remote possibility, we should check around for report incidents in the real world, because it's already happening. And it's not so difficult to get this fail. Okay, let's talk about something less dangerous than a leak, but painful as well. As we saw in the previous talk, let's say this architecture, we have an header which is a React server component because it's server component by default. With inside the user avatar server component because we call we use the user session, and a widget which is a client component. Our boss asked us to have animated snowflakes in the header, like 90s. And to make them happy, we change the header page, the header component, into a use client component to install some random libs which kill our CPU in our browser. But the point is, of course, you all know that a server component cannot be invoked and called inside a client component. So, unsolvable problem? Of course it's not. But to do this, we must reinvent our architecture of our page, and a big refactoring is needed, which can take a lot of time, and start thinking about does it work or not. Okay, let's talk about server action. We have our server action very easily, and call it in the form below, the classic form. And we said that the function that are server actions are converted and encapsulated into API calls. But this means that they invoked like fetch, and that data is passed over the network. And to pass data over the network, what do we need? Serialization. And you all know that not everything is serializable. So the point is, we are not used to have a function in the file invoked a few lines below that abstract a complete communication over the network. So I expect that the object that I created and returned in the tasking function will be returned in my action. And it's not always this way. But let's think about this bind function. This is the code that probably a lot of people in this room can write, me included, of course, especially if suggested in some example of Next.js. But what happened on the network in this case? The binded parameters are passed to the client to be sent back to the server. So in the network, we can see we have the user ID and the message ID in plain text. And changing the parameters in the API means that we should be able to delete all the messages for all the users. If we are lucky, we have lost only the messages. By the way, this is also this time, this is not a constructed example for this speech, but is a real case. And Sasha Kossi, who is an open source developer, maintainer of the FNS, for example, realized it in time the security breach and documented it on X, but not so fast was another developer, a platform in Netflix. And the point is not that React server components or server action are unsecure, no, but just we are facing a new kind of problems derived from the new paradigm. And the problem probably is that they are really shipping frameworks that use this, and we are not ready to use. By the way, let's close with this. All the abstraction layer are used to split our application in multiple small services. We have static files and chunks in our CDN, and middlewares in edge workers, and serverless functions that are used for our server actions, but also for the server components as well. And this is an amazing chart of all services under the hood that I have taken from a company that maybe you don't know, or maybe yes, I don't know. But what if we want to host our web application on our cloud with all those features? Nobody knows. Because actually, the only one framework that implemented all these features is guided by a company which sells the service. Of course, it's fine. And how can I should configure my Cloudflare to run this? Nobody knows. So we have no time to go deeper, but you got the point of this vendor lock-in in some way. And last but not least, how many of you know how to debug a React application in the client using the profiler or developer tools? Okay. And how many of you know how to debug an advanced Node.js multi-thread application with memory leaks, call API, queries, and so on? Come on. With console log, yes. It's always the same. I don't have the answer because it's another path to the backend career and experience in Node.js application. So I'm sure you got the point. So in conclusions, use consciousness when adopting this new feature that are really amazing. Because the modern frameworks are growing fast in every possible direction, client, server, probably sooner or later, they put their hand in infrastructure, and moving complexity from front-end to back-end and vice versa enable us to ship incredible user experience, but also introduce a new kind of problems that we need to face every day. And everything is running really so fast. I feel like the ecosystem is like a startup, fail fast and break things. And my fear is that, except if you have a big team of platform engineer or a dedicated team to R&D, follow the instability of these iterations, can be more a cost than a benefit that produce. This is the release notes for next 15, released on Monday, so 4 days ago. And they are already introduced 2 breaking changes, which are not so easy, and new syntax for something else. And we saw like the use cache will reinvent how we cache the components and computing. So every new feature or abstraction have been designed for specific problems that may not match yours. And probably, I think, it's not yet time to retire the single-page applications. Thank you.
Thank you, Matteo. So, question time. Is better using SSR approach with CDN instead of using React Server Component? I mean, which is the cache policy of server components?
Okay, it depends on what framework are you using, because the cache policy, as we saw, the React server components is just like a fetch to a server that return a payload in JSON. So it should be configured on the full stack framework you are using or you are building. And there are two types of caches that can be used on the client side to avoid to refetch the same component for some time. Like a normal fetch, you can use a service worker, for example, or a local cache, as we saw, or the server cache, keeping the payload, the React server components payload cached with locally with a cache in front of this, like Varnish or something like this. So there is no standard. It depends on your application.
Okay, thank you.
And should be configured by the framework.
Next, do you see a growth towards aligning what used to be a non-node backend into the React server component? Server actions are hard to find a use for when there is already a dedicated backend and team for it.
Yes. Server actions give us the illusion that we don't need a backend server. So we can create code that run in the server, we can do queries, we can fetch data from the database and send emails and whatever. And every experienced developer knows that the backend is something more than to write and read calls on the database. It's made by queues, emails, security, authorization, and a lot of more stuff that a front-end developer is not used to face, and it's fine. So my suggestion is to not use the server actions as a replacement for the backend, but just to use like a backend for front-end. So let's use it to implement a blazing fast application like a front-end, where front-end is not anymore the keyword for who code in the browser, but who code what is the user experience with our data. So and keep segregated all the data, all code for the backend in the backend part with any kind of technology. So it cannot replace the backend and should not.
Sure, thanks. Next question. How do we debug server-side components in production apps? Debug server components.
Ah, I'm missing. No, no, it's not so difficult, but you should start considering that you have two React, one in the client and one in the server, with same logic sometimes and different logic sometimes. So we don't have any tool to suggest because there is no one is still developing it. And I see that the company that are investing into React server components, or probably the company, I don't know, is running to ship new feature to increase the developer experience for developer who want to use the React server components. But they are focused on the developer experience in writing and shipping new abstraction layers instead of the tooling for now. And also for React team, they are still experimental, so there is nothing to suggest on this side.
Good luck.
Yes, but have fun.
Next, I don't know how much time.
Any question here?
Oh, do you have a question?
An almost serious question. Can you stack pragmas, use client, use cache, use server, use client? Can you put them together in the same execution context, or React doesn't like it?
It's not about React, but it's by the compiler. So like Babel, like TurboPack for Next, and I didn't try it. I suppose you use server and a use client cannot be used in the same function, and it has no sense. And especially because use client is the directive on top of the file. Instead, the use server is inside, also inside in functions. Cannot, no, use client cannot be used inside the function. But all the file has been declared as a client. With the use cache, it's just another declarative. I think it can be used anywhere.
Other question from the public here? So, no, I have other question here. One, two, okay. Let me just check because I have multiple tools. Okay. Any suggestion about education? Like, do you think that the full stack framework like Next.js are going to be the standard in the future?
I would like to know, because I will sell a lot of content services, but I don't know. Probably they will be, because they allow us to shape really blazing fast applications, and the user experience is really increased. So at some point, the cost to maintain this kind of application will be replaced by the profit we can do with our products. The point is, like we saw with Next, every iteration breaks things, and they decide to change something, or they decide how we should write something, like the cache, like, I don't know, probably will change again the hook use action state. So my suggestion on for self-formation is to focus on the basics, and as we saw, open the React library, play with the native API, implement something, and understand what is going under the hood and under all those layers of abstraction. And in this way, when they decide, we will decide how the syntax will be. We probably will be ready to understand what is happening under the hood, and we know how to debug it, and it's just sugar syntax for the implementation.
Okay, so I think last one. Do you deploy your Next.js application on Vercel or where else?
And it is a slide. Honestly, I deployed 50% of my Next.js application on Vercel, and the other 50% in cloud server, and there is no other option nowadays. I'm not against Vercel, and I think their products is amazing and solve my team from a lot of configurations and fine-tuning and so on. So it's just a product, and if it suits your needs and the pricing is available for your business, I think it's very, I suggest the product. On the other hand, to have all those performance features and set up a cloud service with any cloud service provider with functions, CDN, and something like this there is no documentation. You can do it. It's just read the code of Next and deploy it, but it's it doesn't work now. So from my side, it's 50-50 basically on the project.
Okay, thank you. Another applause for Matteo.